there, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today. We're talking about micronutrients and what we now know about health. We're going to give it maybe like another couple seconds while I'm doing the intro to allow people to join the panel. I wanted to welcome you. I'm V Spear. I'm the host of Under the Desk News on TikTok, taking complicated, often politicized issues and breaking them down into easy to understand truths. I am absolutely thrilled to be talking with two of my friends and colleagues, Masha Davis and Janice Baker, about one of my favorite topics, building better health through food. So when you hear the saying, food is medicine, you may all be thinking of like images of food pyramids and prescription pads reading like, take to farmer's market as needed. And yes, that is a part of how this works. But what we often miss when focusing on dietary restrictions are dietary optimizations. So all three of us have programs that address the impact of healthy food access and chronic illness management. And in fact, we actually work together on a solution called Food Pharmacy and the Vitameter, which we'll talk about later. But what we're going to explore today is how do micronutrients affect your gut biome, your DNA even, and fuel optimal health and mitigate the symptoms of chronic illness. We'll talk to you about how focusing on micronutrients, literally just fruits and vegetables, like nothing fancy, no fancy supplements or fad diets, just literally this came out of the ground and is widely available at my farmer's market or grocery store, how that can unlock physical, mental, and financial health through food. Because again, it's not like there's $1 million silver bullet. This is just normal stuff we see every day, just actual fruits and vegetables. So I want to warn you, we did get over 100 questions. We maxed out at 500 applicants for this particular session. It's been really exciting to see how interested folks are in it. So with 100 questions, we're going to treat it a little bit more like a lightning round so we can get as many of the answers out to y'all as possible. And this video will also be available to watch again directly following this panel. So with all of that in place, I want to introduce you to first Masha Davis, a nationally recognized registered dietitian and nutritionist, the author of Eat Your Vitamins and Food Myths. Based in LA, she is committed to promoting holistic nutrition in a way that also makes for a healthy planet. So Masha, you've talked about how your global experience has enabled you to objectively understand what influences our eating habits and the best practices for preparing these foods. What is the most common micronutrient deficiency in the United States?
So there are actually a few micronutrient deficiencies that are really common in the US. The most common one, and this is one I see all the time in my own practice with my own clients, is vitamin D. I would say that about 80% of the US population is either deficient or has a subclinical deficiency. So most people are really lacking in this. And there's been more and more research coming out in the last 10 years on the multitude of roles that vitamin D plays, not only in overall health, but things like depression and immunity and gut microbiome, all of these things, hormone levels. So that's the number one that I would say. But I also want to mention potassium, magnesium, and calcium. These are some of the other really, really kind of standout ones that many people are also lacking in.
Yeah, I feel that myself. I hear those when I go to the doctor too, and you're like, but I'm eating fresh, I'm doing the best I can. Is there anything that folks could be doing? Like we always hear like vitamin D, go outside, but with winter coming or rainy days, like what can we be doing to mitigate these vitamin deficiencies?
Vitamin D is a really interesting one because it's found in so few foods. It's actually the only thing that I typically recommend my clients supplement with as kind of a standard, just because that's one that's just really hard to get from foods. It is found in things like fatty fish, certain fatty foods, but even some mushrooms, but it's really low in most of these. And most Americans don't eat enough fish and seafood as well. So even if they're able to get some from a few of these sources, most people just aren't eating enough. And most people don't spend that much time in the sun. We're wearing sunscreen, we're covered up. We do spend most of our time indoors. So that's one that you actually usually have to supplement with.
Makes sense. And I think we're going to dive more into the vitamin D thing in a little bit too. Introducing next, Janice Baker, registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, certified nutritional support clinician, and is a board certified advanced diabetes management. Currently serving the patients at Arch Health Medical Group, Janice is working day to day on the front lines of chronic illness and no doubt seeing a litany of best practices when it comes to healthy eating. But even things like restrictive diets and pills, I hear there's like even a shot out right now where you can for weight loss. When it comes to micronutrients for individuals with diabetes specifically, what is the most important thing for them to be considering?
That's a great question with a lot of answers, because everyone with diabetes is very unique, like a fingerprint, right? So, there's no one size fit all, but it really sort of depends on the person's age, how the diabetes is being treated, complications of diabetes, medications they're taking. So one thing that we pay particular attention to is, first of all, how's this diabetes being treated? So if they are taking a commonly prescribed medication called metformin or glucophage is the brand name, we know that that can get in the way of vitamin B12 absorption over time, and that can affect nervous system function. People may also be taking other medications like for heartburn, because that's very common. That can also get in the way of vitamin B12. Vitamin D is often low because of poor diet, but also excess weight that sort of traps vitamin D in the fat part of the body. When people have diabetes for a long time, they also can have liver disease and kidney disease. The liver and the kidneys also is responsible for activating vitamin D. You can get vitamin D from foods, from sunshine, from supplements, but there's a process of activating it that people don't realize. So when we have liver and kidney disease, there may be other issues going on as well. Sometimes there's others, just depending on other coexisting issues, but B12 is something I pay particular attention to. It's one of many, though.
Makes sense. Yeah, I did not know that. That's very interesting. Now, when we were preparing for this panel, we had some discussion around how important it is to have presence when you're eating and grocery shopping. And an effort to optimize your health can sometimes quickly slide into an eating disorder. Can you talk a little bit more about protecting yourself from those maladaptive eating habits, the just like brainwashing that diet culture has done to us for decades?
Yeah, I can talk a lot about that because it's very under the radar and very present, because we're in a culture that is very overwhelming in terms of telling us what to be afraid of, what bad food is, good food is, you shouldn't eat this, you should eat this, and you should fit into this mold and look this way, or you're not good enough. And I work with a lot of people in the eating disorder side. That's a huge part of my practice. And over years of restrictive diets and weight cycling, that in itself is a huge stress. We call that allostatic load, a lot of stress from trying to fit in, just being overwhelmed with all the diet culture out there. So what I work with on people after almost 40 years of doing this and seeing a lot of things is helping people develop a peaceful, relaxed relationship with food. Food is not just about nutrients, it's about a joy and lovely part of life. And if that's not there, that is not nutrition. So we can talk about nutrients all day long, but if people are not enjoying their food and getting full satisfaction, there's a problem. And people feel like they're not entitled to have joy from food in many cases. So that's something I work with people on, is not just the nutritional part, but making sure they're satisfied, they're nourished, and there's no perfect part to that. So perfectionism gets in the way of being healthy, actually.
It makes sense. I mean, in the food is medicine community, we're talking about how we have to pair culinary arts with food as medicine, because culinary arts is so focused on the enjoyment of food, the taste, the texture, the smell, where you're sitting when you're doing it, and how all of that comes together to create a pleasurable experience. And it's so important that you remind people of that when they're talking about what they're eating. It's not just eating to facilitate fueling your body, but eating to facilitate fueling your entire sort of like personhood.
And there's a lot of cultural connection. I mean, what you enjoy in Sweden is different than what you enjoy in Japan and Italy. And those are all lovely, wonderful dietary patterns that serve a purpose. And they connect us to tradition and, the culture. And we can't discount that at all.
Absolutely. So important. Masha, you work with a lot of younger folks who are coming to you for nutrition education, are there any micronutrients that are especially important for developing people, say like teenagers?
Absolutely. You know, one of the most important ones is calcium. In general, most Americans are low or have a subclinical deficiency in this, but it's so important during the adolescent phases, because this is the critical time that we're building our bone structure, building our skeletal structure. And if we are not getting enough calcium at this time, that can lead to all kinds of issues down the road. So there's this limited window. It's about until the mid-20s or so when you can really optimize strengthening and building those bones. And that's so critical during adolescence. And unfortunately, a lot of teenagers are actually deficient in calcium. So that's probably the most important one. And of course, as many people recognize, calcium and vitamin D are so closely linked, right? They work together in synergy. So again, you know, there's so much that vitamin D is needed for. I think we're just going to be talking about it over and over. But this is the other one that's really key.
And similar with the teens and the 20s, and you know, lots of different folks, but especially I feel like young people are so adverse to what I grew up with in the 80s and 90s, where it was like have a glass of milk all the time to get calcium and vitamin D, right? Are there things that teens could be looking towards that are calcium rich, vitamin D rich, that aren't milk?
Yeah. Well, the nice thing now is that so many of the alternative milks, almond milk, oat milk, all of these different products that have come out are already supplemented and fortified with calcium, and many of them with vitamin D as well. So the key thing is to check the label and make sure that it does have that fortification, because then you'll be getting the same amount as you would in a glass of milk or in yogurt, you know, and you don't have to only choose that.
That really lit my day up, because I'm an oat milk kind of person, and now I feel like I'm on the right track already.
Yeah, so just check that label and make sure that it's there.
Absolutely. And Janice, on the other side of things, are there any micronutrients that are best at reversing long-term damage from things like stress, as you were saying, or poor life habits, smoking, stuff like that, when people want to sort of straighten out later in life?
Well, if you've been smoking for 50 years, I don't know of any micronutrient that's going to reverse that. I mean, I'd love to find out about that if that were true, but it is never too late to support your body nutritionally. I mean, honestly, I work with a lot of people in all stages of life, and, you know, things happen over time that you can't always control. Stuff comes up because, you know, I grew up in Los Angeles in the 60s and 70s. Without any control over it, breathed in a lot of smog before there were air quality regulations, you know. So I can't necessarily reverse that, but, you know, good nutrition support. I work with a lot of patients with lung issues. It's part of my role in chronic disease management. What we know is really important is, you know, healthful eating to keep the body strong, to minimize the risk of deficiencies. You know, but it's not just food. It's also maintaining lean body mass with exercise, strength training, things like that. Adequate calcium if people are on medications that may get in the way of bone strength, adequate protein. So it's not just one micronutrient that can make a reversal, but they can be supportive and to reduce the risk of progression of issues. You know, we can't always control, but we can influence.
I'm writing that down. We can't always control, but we can influence.
Yeah.
So outside of, let's say, like things like stress and smoking and whatnot, but similarly related to aging, is there anything that folks could be doing to potentially ease inflammation, arthritis, things like that?
Yeah. So, you know, this is kind of off the nutrient thing, but inflammation is sort of a buzzword that's used a lot, but definitely we know good diet rich in fruits and veggies really do help support that. You know, with all the complex nutrients they have in them, it's not just one nutrient, it's the whole thing. Plenty of fruits and veggies, either frozen or fresh, even canned are fine.
And Masha, I want to, go ahead.
On the same topic, Inflammation can come from other things, chronic infections that you may not know about. Poor dental status is a very big hit to nutritional status and inflammation. I mean, I talk about dental care a lot because the bacteria in the gums can go directly into the body, causes systemic inflammatory response. That's often ignored. And if you don't have good teeth, you can't chew your food well, and that's going to be an obstacle to good nutrition. So it's often ignored because it's not very sexy, but good dental care is a really critical part of nutrition.
Right. And Masha, I wanted to come to you on that point because Janice had said fresh or frozen and whatnot. I know you do a lot of work to kind of let people know when it's okay to buy fresh, frozen, and even when grocery store produce may not give you any nutritional value at all, you really got to check those labels. Can you talk a little bit more about when you're choosing your foods, what are some best practices and when is it okay to buy frozen?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an important point. And a lot of people have this perception that they have to only buy, fresh and organic only. And that's such a misconception because frozen can actually be even better than fresh sometimes. Most frozen fruits and veggies are frozen at the peak of ripeness. So it's like locking in all the nutrients at that moment. And, if a fresh fruit or veggie is sitting in the store for a while, if it's traveling a long distance, it's going to be losing some of those nutritional properties. There's going to be oxidation happening. The nutritional, quantity will go down. So sometimes frozen is absolutely fantastic and more affordable. People also have, I think there's a common misconception that they have to spend a lot of money to eat healthily. And that's really not the case. As Janice said, frozen can be great. Even some canned fruits and veggies can be great. Just look out for the sodium and added sugars. And, things like going to the local farmer's market to get things that are not traveling those far distances, that are being picked closer to the source and obtained right there. Those are some really, really good practices. Trying to eat seasonally.
When I was doing research for this panel and knowing how much work you do with aquaculture and like getting people to understand fish and whatnot, I came across a quote where they were explaining how even sushi fish is frozen. It's frozen when it's caught. That's how they make it. I don't know why I thought it was coming from the ocean directly to my mouth, but it's not. They even freeze your sushi fish, which just made me think, like, really broke down my preconceived notions about what freezing food and defrosting it meant.
Yeah. And I mean, it tastes like it's super fresh, right? Like when you're eating the sushi, it tastes so good, so fresh. So the freezing, when it's done correctly, it's absolutely an incredible way to get perfectly great food.
And I want to ask you another question outside. We'll get to like ways to prepare food to maximize nutritional density and whatnot, but staying in the health and kind of chronic illness space for just a second longer, there were some questions from the audience on what micronutrients are needed when a whole food diet is consumed, but your digestion or metabolism are not working, say in cases of like Crohn's or IBS, stuff like that. Do you have any suggestions for folks at home when they're sort of dealing with, I'm eating whole foods, but my digestion and metabolism are just not like keeping up with me?
Yeah. I mean, that's such a uniquely individual issue, and it really depends on the severity. My first thought is, okay, what's going on if your digestion isn't working properly and you're eating a lot of plant-based foods and minimally processed foods, a whole foods diet? I would want to see a gastroenterologist for that and figure out what is happening. Having said that, there are certain things that are recommended that people need to look at. For example, the most common deficiency with a lot of gut disorders, such as Crohn's, is vitamin B12. So that's one that I would highly recommend people look at and really, really try to optimize. And of course, looking at things like, are you getting enough fiber? Are you getting enough probiotics? Are you getting enough anti-inflammatory foods like omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin A, vitamin E, things like that are going to be really supportive and healing for the gut.
Makes a lot of sense. And Janice, in your experience, clinically, like with the folks that you're working with right now, you had mentioned before taking a heartburn medicine can affect your micronutrient absorption. Can you talk a little bit about how acid reflux is causing a little bit of havoc in the way that people who are trying to eat healthy or experiencing diabetes are running up against another issue that they can maybe mitigate?
Yeah, so that heartburn, acid reflux, sometimes we call it GERD, GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease. That can happen for a number of reasons. It can be a physiology reason like slow motility. Somebody's had diabetes a long time, that can affect the nerves and can make food go through your 27-foot GI tract in a very erratic way. And that can make blood sugars worse, and it can be a very vicious cycle. But if somebody is eating really fast, really quickly, very erratic meals, eating a lot at once, eating right before bedtime, that can cause reflux and heartburn. And so we need to zoom out, look at the eating patterns, the symptoms, how well people are chewing can make a big difference. I mean, I talk to people all the time about not just what they eat, but how they eat. Are they chewing their foods thoroughly? Because our mouth is meant to be at the first part of the digestive process. There's salivary amylase, there's enzymes in our mouth. If you're not chewing enough, that's putting a big burden downstream. That's going to make the rest of your gut not too happy. So chewing is very important, as part of the problem. And people often tell me happens a lot. I'm just not chewing my food like I should. So I look at distracted eating habits. It's amazing how well that works when you chew your food.
You have just blown my mind in this moment, though, because we talk about distracted eating and don't eat in front of the TV, but I never thought about it I thought it was in terms of like really looking at your plate and enjoying the meal and respecting like everything that went into getting that food to your table. But it's also just chewing it, like actually just chewing your food.
Actually chewing it. What a concept. Chew your own food. And so, I talk about like, if people are so used to eating in front of screens, I say, turn on music instead. Nice, gentle music, not some hard rock stuff maybe, but so you can really savor and appreciate the food. The experience is part of digestion.
Right. Yeah. Oh my God. Makes so much sense. Also, Masha, I appreciate that you said you need to see a gastroenterologist. Sometimes we're looking for like a friend who's going to be on this journey with us the entire time. And it's a lot of folks who are on the journey with us the entire time to figure out what exactly went wrong. We're already right now, and we're halfway through. We've got a dietitian, a nutritionist, we've got a gastroenterologist and a dentist who we're working with now to see where we're at. So now for folks who are not chronically ill per se, but are rather looking for a holistic approach to hormone balancing, folks who are maybe like going through menopause or perhaps transgender folks who are going through hormone replacement, any advice to those folks who are battling sort of like hormone changes at the same time that they're trying to improve their diet?
Is that for me?
It could be for you, sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I address this a lot because of my practice in eating disorders, which can happen at any age. It's not just for young teenage girls, men and women, all ages. I see a lot of eating disorders in, and it's often very under the radar. You could look perfectly fine and there could be serious issues. So it's just make sure people are eating enough. There's something called hypothalamic amenorrhea. When people are not eating enough, their internal organs can be starved. That could be the liver, the kidneys, the thyroid. So over restriction, weight cycling, restrict binge cycle that you can't tell by how somebody looks if they're malnourished in that way can have a lot of impact on hormones just because of how it affects your body fat regulation, other organ systems, how medications are absorbed. So it's really looking at the bigger picture, the whole context of things. Sometimes we do need some hormone support. I have hypothyroid and I eat well and I exercise, but my thyroid's low and I take a little bit of thyroid med to correct it, just like my 25-year-old daughter does. She has an autoimmune thyroid disease and it's treated the same way. So sometimes a little bit of medicine is needed, and food is not always medicine. Food is not my asthma inhalers. So, we need to kind of keep that in context too. But definitely we have to look out if there's any significant restrictions, not enough eating. You can definitely have thyroid impact, for example, with under eating. That can be a thing as well, along with other
And
hormones.
Masha, totally. Masha, anything to add to that for the women? It was our most popular question, how to potentially use micronutrients as it relates to hormones, aging, and menopause, perimenopause, all that. Anything that you can suggest as well?
Yes, definitely. I love everything that Janice said. I think that kind of zooming out and looking at that initially, like, are you even eating enough? Are you supporting, all of these different macros that you need to get, first and foremost. And then, in addition to that, there are specific micronutrients that are so closely linked to hormone production, hormone balance. We already talked about vitamin D. Vitamin D is actually a hormone, not a vitamin, but we call it vitamin D. So that's probably the main one. But there's also some other really key ones that many people in the US are low in, like selenium is a really big one. That is very much linked to thyroid health, speaking of thyroid, and having a deficiency in that can actually, even a subclinical deficiency, can over time lead to thyroid issues. So, looking at how we can optimize these micronutrients and prevent things down the road. So selenium, iodine, vitamin D, those are the really big ones that I would call out that are implicated in hormones.
Makes a ton of sense. So we're going to move a little bit out of the specifics on like chronic illness right now into preparing micronutrients for eating. And Masha, I want to ask you, how do you feel about mushrooms? How do mushrooms play in?
I love mushrooms.
I know.
They are phenomenal. They're actually one of the few food sources that actually contain vitamin D. It depends how they're grown. They need to be exposed to UV light to make the vitamin D, but some mushrooms do contain it. And there has been so much emerging research on all of these other extraordinary, beneficial compounds that are in different kinds of mushrooms. It's a huge kind of trending thing in the US right now, but mushrooms have been used in so many different cultures, in many Asian cultures, in China for so long, for their beneficial properties.
Is it a digestive aid? Does it help with absorption? Like, what's the magic with mushrooms?
It depends on the type of mushroom, right? Some of them are adaptogenic and they can help to balance out the stress in the body. Others can help with reducing inflammation. Others can help with digestion. So there's so many different types.
A lot to learn about mushrooms. And then I wanted to ask y'all, so like, do certain food combinations decrease the nutritional value of other foods eaten? It feels like caffeine. If you're drinking like coffee with your meal or tea with your meal or something, or having a soda with your meal, well, that's a whole other story. But does anything like that decrease the nutritional value of a meal?
Well, sometimes like the tannins can get in the way of iron absorption, so if that's an issue that may be looked at. Tea, for example, can get in the way of iron absorption, but it just really depends on how much and how often. So typically your body's really smart at, getting through those kind of things. Now, another thing is if you're eating a huge amount of fiber, like you're just packing the fiber in because you think that's a great thing, a huge amount of fiber in your diet is also going to get in the way, competing for having the micronutrients not be absorbed as well, just because of its impact on digestion. So that can be an issue too. For the most part, though, your intestinal tract is very smart and very adaptable at knowing how much to absorb based upon the body's deficiencies and things like that, unless there's another medical issue or medication going on.
Yeah, we had a question here about how much fiber is the right amount of fiber.
Typically, it sort of depends on people. The general recommendation is about 14 grams per 1,000 calories eaten, 30 to 35 grams of fiber a day. And listen, fiber comes in different forms. There's soluble fiber, there's insoluble fiber. So you get a mix of those when you have a variety of foods like oats and beans and fruits and veggies and whole grains, you're going to get a mix of those fibers. But we know that, some fibers like the insoluble fibers pretty much go through your body unchanged. What we really have an interest in, what I recommend a lot, is more the soluble fibers, which are considered what we call prebiotics, because they tend to help with cholesterol levels. They level out cholesterol levels, level out blood sugar levels. They're fermented into what we call short chain fatty acids that are fuel for this lining of the GI tract. They feed the good cells that line the gut, which prevents what we call bacterial translocation. They feed the good bacteria. So they're like fertilizer for the microbiome. So these great sources of fiber also come with great nutrients like oats and beans and fruits and veggies. So it's not just the fiber, it's the whole package that we see as being very beneficial.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And Masha, you had something to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, that is fantastic, everything that Janice said. And I think it's really important to point out that 9 out of 10 Americans are not getting enough of the fiber.
Mm-hmm.
So the vast majority of people aren't anywhere near that daily recommendation of 25 to 35 grams. Most people, I would say most people don't even get half, which is contributing to so many health conditions like diabetes and heart disease, so many of these things that we're looking at and trying to prevent. And getting enough fiber is one of the top things that you can do.
Now, we've talked a little bit about what works and some things that folks can do. Are there any things that are just straight up lies about what you may have been told about eating healthy or micronutrients that we could potentially talk about there? Eggs are bad, stuff like that.
Well, the eggs are bad. Listen, the 80s called and they want their bad advice back, right? I was there for that. So, nutrition is a science and it evolves over time with more research. And listen, everyone's unique and individual. So even in how our body makes serum cholesterol is dependent on a lot of genetics, not just the food itself, but the matrix of food. So you can be eating one food, but you can eat all kinds of other foods, and that can have an impact on how much cholesterol your body absorbs. There's so many other parts to that equation. So just saying eggs are bad, eggs cause high cholesterol, again, that's really old. It's not a thing, but it's really the whole context of the diet and what people's individual needs are, what their age is at, what the goals of care are at. So yeah, like I tell my patients with diabetes who are been so afraid of eating, I say to them, listen, jelly beans can save a life, because when you have low blood sugar, if your blood sugar is low because of medication or missed a meal or too much activity or whatever, you don't give someone an avocado. It's not going to work. You need quick sugar to save your life, to keep your brain from stopping and your heart from stopping. So really every food has a place and we need to look at what that place is.
And Masha, do you have something to add to that too about the misconceptions with food lately?
Definitely. I mean, there's so many different ones. And like Janice said, nutrition is constantly evolving, but we also have, what I call the weight of the evidence. So that can really help to kind of combat a lot of the myths. So diets or recommendations that tell people to almost cut out an entire food group, like carbohydrates on the keto diet. The weight of the evidence shows us that that is just, for the vast majority of people, not supportive to long-term health. That's cutting out a huge amount of those essential micronutrients that we've been talking about, that fiber that most people need more of, not less of. So, really going to credentialed sources is really, really important, and looking at the weight of the evidence. What does the majority of research say? There's a big debate also in the nutrition community about which fats are good, which fats are less healthy, and a lot of people have a misperception that saturated fat is okay. It's okay to eat, a huge amount of it if you're doing something like the keto diet. But the weight of the evidence shows us that is not the case.
Masha, I can't just juice my way to health. That's not going to work.
That's taking out all the fiber.
I know. What about wine? Is wine a micronutrient at least? Can we do something with wine in the micronutrients world?
I mean, I wouldn't consume wine for the micronutrients. It certainly has some of those nice phytonutrients, that resveratrol and quercetin, that those do have some great antioxidant properties. And, you know, that's one of those things that again, the weight of the evidence shows that in small doses can be healthful, you know, 1 glass a day. And of course, it's going to have the reverse effect and be harmful in larger doses than that.
A question we have coming in while we're sort of on the topic of like misinformation and shortcuts and whatnot is how to get more iron into your food. And some folks will say put iron supplements in. I've been seeing on TikTok all these little fish that they're like cooking in the food that like adds iron potentially to it. Is there any sort of helper that helps get iron into food? And Masha, you can start.
Absolutely, yes. This is a great topic. So there is heme iron and non-heme iron. Heme is found in animal sources and it's more easily absorbed by the body, but you can also get plenty of iron from plants. That's the non-heme iron. And this is where you need that helper, which is vitamin C, that's going to help your body to utilize it and absorb it. So really, you know, really trying to combine the two is critical. And you mentioned iron supplements. I think that's a really important thing to cover. This is something that I talk about extensively in my book is, you know, being really, really cautious with supplements. Certainly sometimes they're needed, but especially ones like iron, you have to be so careful with them because iron is an oxidant. So if you take it for more than 30 days as a supplement, you can actually start to do harm to your tissues and organs from having excess iron. So that's one that you have to be really cautious with. And I really try to get people to optimize their intake from food sources.
Right. Janice, did you have something to add on the iron convo?
Yeah, iron, definitely. I agree with completely everything because iron can be tricky. There can definitely be issues with iron toxicity. I mean, that's a real dangerous thing. I have caught cases of what we call hemochromatosis in the labs of my patients. There's iron overload disease. Some people just absorb it too much and you wouldn't know unless you had a lab test. So that needs to be looked at. There's some foods that are iron fortified that these people need to stay away from. Sometimes this even needs to be treated medically by hematologists. There's a certain amount of people that have that and they just wouldn't know, but that can cause organ damage. Certain age ranges or medical conditions can mean that you need higher iron levels, like young women who are having menstruation, they can lose iron and they often don't get enough in their diet. Iron deficiency anemia can make you feel awful. I've had that before. Pregnancy has a higher iron demand. And I work with a lot of people who've had weight loss surgery, bariatric surgery. And if you have a part of your stomach amputated or part of your GI tract taken out or not used, that can impact iron absorption. So these people who've had bariatric surgery can really need extra iron supplements just because of their malabsorption or restrictive part of that surgery. So there are conditions for this, but when we see iron deficiency, we need to look behind the curtain, have them medically evaluated, see why that's happening. There could be blood loss for other reasons. There could be a hematology issue. Kidney disease can cause iron deficiency because the kidneys produce a hormone that tells your bone marrow to create red blood cells. And we can have anemia of chronic disease, anemia of kidney disease. So it's a lot more complicated than just getting enough iron in your diet. So it just needs to be looked into medically, not just throw a bunch of supplements at yourself, because that can be dangerous, actually.
Yeah, I think that's great feedback from both of y'all. This idea that like you need to, it isn't going to be a silver bullet solution.
No.
And like, while we want to eat for health, we also don't want to eat ourselves with bad health by doing too much of the wrong thing or trying to over supplement. Moving on to what we're able to do today, thanks to Everything Food Have Enough All here, to talk to everybody and do this lightning round of questions, trying to help folks out, is awesome, but having a nutritionist, having a dietitian, even having health insurance can be really difficult for folks at home. Are there resources that you can think of that are widely available, free, even easy ways, free ways to get more of this, get more access to this education or to these truths? What would you suggest to folks at home?
Well, I recommend my professional organization, eatright.org. It's, the organization that gives a lot of great nutrition information, general information. Again, it doesn't replace individual medical nutrition therapy by a dietitian, but it's got a lot of great resources. My other professional organizations include diabetes.org, heart.org, nutritioncare.org. These are all great resources that can help people with specific issues that they can search, and pretty reliable information right there. Those are great starts, but again, it's general information. It's not a substitute for a patient-provider relationship.
Right, makes sense. And Masha, same with you. I mean, I deal with so many like cookbooks and books on things. What I like about yours is you came from a perspective of a person who came to this country with very little, who made a life for yourself, understands what it's like along that in every single step of that journey for folks. And you do have resources for everybody within that. If you're at the part in your life where you're ready to have a specialized nutritionist experience, you can have that with you. If you're not, but you're really curious, you can buy the book, and it's going to very simply tell you, some of this awesome information you share with us. Can you tell us a little bit more about the resources you provide too?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like Janice said, getting your information from these reliable sources is so critical. So looking for people who have the RD credential, the registered dietitian credential, to get that information from, because there's so much misinformation out there, and you have to be so careful with the source. There's people out there providing information that don't even have a nutrition background. They didn't study the science for years and years like dietitians did. And, they're not evaluating the research and looking at the latest studies and the evidence for all of these things. So, I think social media can be such a great place to get information if you are looking at reliable sources.
Right. It's like what we say in politics. You got to figure out who sent the money for their fundraisers, and then you'll know what they're going to recommend to you. That's why it's so important to look for that RD credential, to find out what hospitals they're affiliated with, what work they've done, so that you're finding somebody who's legitimately there, who's there for the right reasons and cares about you, and isn't necessarily sort of like cosplaying as a registered dietitian when they are really, maybe somebody who's really even good with food, maybe even a chef that you really like, but just doesn't understand this particular discipline when it comes to food. But just throwing that out there. Moving into just our last section, because we only have 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure I get to everybody's questions here. Is there anything that so many folks are home gardening now, especially in the time of COVID, folks really dug into their houses and made a lot of improvements. Is there anything that folks could be doing in their home gardens to make sure that they're growing nutritionally dense food? And either can answer.
Well, I am a real failure at home gardening. So I'm going to question.
All right, we'll defer to Masha. I also am not a huge gardener. I have a lot of plants in my home, but not a home garden yet. But I do know that, using the right kinds of fertilizers, and even things like banana peels and eggshells and composting can add so much nutritional density to the soil and to your home garden. So I would say that would be a huge thing to look at.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And as a chef, I'm going to add to that and say, absolutely. In your home garden, you want to have the things that are easy to grow. In particular, tomatoes, always, if you can have them, grow tomatoes. They grow big and fresh, and they're delicious. And there's nothing quite like an actual tomato. If you get a conventional tomato from the garden or from the grocery store, it's not going to do for you what you want it to. But also remember to pepper in herbs throughout. So using high quality compost, you're tending to them, you're not overwatering them because you love them so much and want to visit them every day. And you're growing big, healthy produce right in your backyard. You don't need a lot to do it. It's a very simple thing, or join your local community garden, something like that. Oftentimes I always find there's like one little old man in the garden who wants to show you how to do something. Find him and he will help you out. So a couple more questions just on diet specifically. Can you talk a little bit about getting more protein into your diet, the micronutrients from protein if you're vegetarian?
Mm-hmm. Well, protein really is available in so many different ways. So you can be vegetarian, flexitarian, pescatarian, and most people have a pretty easy time of that unless they have a lot of restrictions. So I'm a big fan of several types of protein. Now, I do a lot of dairy. I do a lot of Greek yogurt, cheese, canned tuna, canned salmon, because those are things I love and that are easy. Fish, but also high protein grains like beans, or legumes, beans, nuts, oats are great high protein grain, quinoa. So with a mix of these, with people eating enough, typically it's going to be fine. I'm also a fan of tofu, and I make a lot of soy type dishes. And I think with that mix of the different types of proteins and some, chicken and fish as well, eggs are wonderful, easy source of protein, iron, the nutrient we were just talking about, very high quality protein. So, some people, yes, they use protein powders and protein shakes and things like that. And there's a place for that. But I really like getting protein from just regular food, just because there's a lot of other things besides protein that go along with it.
I'm pretty sure I read in Masha's book, it was like pumpkin seeds or something have a very high level of protein too. There's like a lot in different things.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Nuts and seeds. Yeah. I mean, everything that Janice said, that's perfect. And I actually say the same thing to my clients. I say, try to get your protein from whole food sources versus protein powders. Protein powders are so popular, but most people actually don't have a problem getting enough protein from their food.
One follow-up question on mushrooms for Masha. Will drying your mushrooms concentrate the nutritional properties or not so much?
Ooh, I think it depends on how you're drying them and the types of mushrooms. And it depends on which nutrients we're talking about too. Some of the antioxidants might be lost, but some other nutrients might be optimized. Makes
sense. And Rosalind, I see your question too. We're going to respond privately as it's a more independent thing. So I'll get you in touch with folks to answer that question more directly, as it needs a little bit more care than we can do right now. I believe that is our questions. I think I got to everybody's here, which is great. Thank you guys so much for everything you've done. Is there anything that y'all want to leave folks with in terms of like parting thoughts on micronutrients, approaching this sort of like building better health through food? And maybe start with Janice.
Okay, so what I say again is, eating should be pleasurable. It should be fun. It should be joyful. It should be relaxed. But it can be different. There's no one perfect way of eating. I really like to honor people's culture, their affordability, their access to food, their ability to cook and to shop, their even interest in cooking. Listen, our energy levels are finite. So having raised 3 kids and been really spread thin, honestly, sometimes a frozen pizza that you put some extra peppers on and you serve a bowl of grapes and some carrots with it, that checks all the boxes, and you shouldn't feel guilty about that. Sometimes, you can get more into cooking and having a good time with that if you have the time, the energy, the access to that. So there's no one perfect way of feeding yourself, but we want to make sure you're eating enough. And the point I make is that people are always hearing about restricting, and I feel guilty about this, and that's bad. There's so much restriction mentality. I really kind of talk in the opposite direction. We need to make sure you're eating enough and having joy with your eating experience. I mean, that's really the bottom line. How I roll. Diabetes, other chronic diseases, honestly, it's just as important for those aspects too.
Yeah, I bet nobody came into this thinking that we're all going to tell you you're not eating enough, right? Every time you come to one of these.
It happens more than you can imagine.
And Masha, any sort of stuff we didn't get to that you wanted to touch on with folks at home?
I mean, I totally agree with everything that Janice said. And to add to that, I think there's just so much fear, and people are scared of so many things. They're afraid of, there's this lectin fear and just all these different gluten fear, all these fears. And it's so important to zoom out, look at the bigger picture, Are you getting your macros? Are you getting your fruits and veggies? Don't obsess over it and worry so much about, whether it's frozen or fresh or organic or not. Like, just focus on getting enough of those things. Certainly it's awesome if you have access to these, great organic fruits and veggies.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, buy the conventional ones, wash them thoroughly, peel them. It is so much better to get them than to avoid them because you're afraid.
Makes total sense. I personally feel very ready to go and learned an awful lot here. I feel just like so many things were answered. But the biggest takeaway for me is going to be make sure you have enough to eat. It's such an important thing because if you're starving one part of your body, then you're just making up for it in a different way. It never quite works out. And I know that y'all have worked on an app with Everything Food that can help track your food micronutrients and maybe like even help me find like a better variety of foods to eat in the categories that I'm deficient in. Because you think like, well, potassium, I guess I'll eat a banana, but like, what, you can only eat so many bananas before you're like, all right, I don't even like bananas. Like, what do I do now? Can you tell me a little bit about the Vitameter app and how this like helps people with food literacy? And either one can start.
Okay, well, what I love about it, it's as opposed to many apps out there that I have reviewed, taken off of people's phones. This is about really more about reflection and, just tracking your overall diet quality intake versus, oh, I went over this calorie limit and I was bad this day and the red light and all this kind of thing. I really love, it's about reflection and detecting patterns. That's really what I'm looking for in my practice. So I love that you can put in your foods and see if you're, over time, you can't eat a perfect diet every day. I certainly go days without vegetables, and I live to talk about it. And really detecting patterns and, maybe where you can make some adjustments to see how that helps you meet the target. And to me, it's very friendly. It's calming. It's not another, thing where you're afraid to look at it. Where am I landing? So it takes away fear and anxiety, which I'm all about that.
Yeah, makes sense. And Masha, what's your experience then? I know you come from like, the science perspective. What do you feel about the app?
Exactly. Well, first of all, there's about 30 different micronutrients, vitamins and minerals that are essential for us to get. And it is, I want to say, almost impossible for any regular person to be tracking all of those and trying to figure out, am I getting enough of this? Am I getting enough of that? Did I combine enough foods with vitamin E within the last few days, or vitamin A? Am I low in vitamin C or zinc or copper? Like all these essential things. And this app like literally just synthesizes all of that information and allows you to see where you fall and then gives you suggestions for how to optimize those specific levels that you might be low in. So I'm so excited about it because I think it'll help so many people with so many of these common deficiencies, because so many people are deficient or subclinically deficient in certain micronutrients, and this is going to make it so much easier for them to optimize those levels and optimize their health. So there's nothing like it out there. It's brilliant, and I'm so excited about it. It's going to help people eat their vitamins.
I know. I got to check it out and I was pretty excited that it doesn't yell at you. There's no accountability partner. It's just like you and like your grocery list and like the different things that you can eat. And I'm like, I don't know if I like dragon fruit, but I'm low in vitamin D or whatever it is. So I'm going to figure it out. Yeah, it's great. So and it's coming out very soon. I believe that y'all are finishing up. What I heard this morning was that y'all are finishing up the data, making sure it's all the T's are crossed, I's are dotted, and that is going to be coming out in November. And we'll send the folks who joined us today and folks who weren't able to join us the link to download it first so that you guys can check it out and see what you think, that Masha and Janice and the Everything Food team know if it's working for you, if you like it for yourself or your clients. Because it really is just meant to exactly this, help people find foods that they love and help them just kind of have fun figuring out like how they can game their bodies in their food to be like, okay, now I've sort of hit my marks a little bit better, but without being like, you didn't lose enough weight this week, so you don't get your chip or whatever other kind of banana stuff happens. Or dinging you because you missed your run, or beeping you to stand up. Like, there's none of that kind of stuff in there. So I want to thank you all for sharing this time and your insights with us. We heard some incredible feedback. This panel will be available for you to rewatch online. And we live streamed it to Facebook, so I'm pretty sure it's available right away. We'll also be doing a blog wrap up that'll come out tomorrow, talking a little bit about what we learned today. Once again, I'm Bee Spear, the host of Under the Desk News on TikTok and Instagram. And I want to thank Masha Davis and Janice Baker. You can find them online as well. If you have any more questions or you want to buy their books or sign up for some one-on-one coaching, we will send all that info out to you in the wrap-up email, along with an invitation to the Vitameter app, which is expected to launch, I think, definitely before Christmas, but I'm pretty sure they said in the next couple of weeks. I know they're working really, really hard to make sure it's like real buttoned up. So thank you to Everything Food for having us today. The World Health Organization estimates that more than 2 billion people suffer from micronutrient deficiency globally. But with empathetic leadership and innovation in the way that we grow, distribute, and value our food, we can continue to drive down the rate of hunger and malnutrition while improving the overall health of this nation. So thank you so much. I will see you guys at the next one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.